The massive ships appeared in the sky without warning. One moment the day was normal, and the next, dark shadows fell over cities across the world. The ships hung in the air, silent and still. They were shaped like giant arrowheads, their surfaces dark and smooth, reflecting no light. Frank Miller was driving to work when it happened. The road ahead suddenly darkened as if a cloud had passed over the sun. He looked up through his windshield and slammed on his brakes. The car behind him honked loudly, but the driver fell silent when he too saw what was happening in the sky. "What the hell is that?" Frank whispered to himself. All around him, cars stopped. People got out and stared upward, phones raised to capture the impossible thing above them. Frank pulled over and got out, his heart racing. As an Air Force cybersecurity specialist, his first thought wasn't about the ships themselves, but about what this meant for Earth's defense systems. He pulled out his phone and tried to call his commanding officer. No signal. He tried again. Nothing. By the time Frank reached the base, chaos had already taken hold. Officers rushed back and forth, shouting orders. Screens that normally showed clear data were filled with static or strange patterns. "Miller, get in here." Colonel Harris waved him into the main communications room. "Every system is going haywire. Something is hitting our networks, but it's like nothing we've ever seen." Frank sat at his station and began typing. The patterns in the system failures weren't random. Someone or something was testing their defenses, probing for weaknesses in a very specific way. "Sir, this isn't just interference," Frank said. "This is targeted. They're mapping our entire digital infrastructure." Across the world, others were making similar discoveries. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Dr. Lisa Wright watched as strange signals appeared on their deep space monitoring equipment. The aliens weren't just sitting there. They were sending out smaller craft, hundreds of them, descending into Earth's atmosphere. Lisa tracked one of these smaller ships as it dropped toward the Nevada desert. She quickly gathered a team and equipment, hoping to reach the landing site before any other government agency. "If we can understand what they're doing, maybe we can figure out why they're here," she told her team as they drove through the desert. They found the crashed probe half buried in sand. It was about the size of a car but shaped like a perfect sphere. Its surface had opened in several places and long, thin devices had extended out, digging into the ground. "Don't touch anything," Lisa warned as they set up equipment to scan the probe. "We don't know if it's dangerous." The readings were puzzling. The probe seemed to be taking samples, soil, air, water from deep underground. But it was also sending out signals, very faint ones that seemed to be looking for something specific. It wasn't until Lisa noticed a small container on the probe's surface that things became clear. Inside were dozens of tiny needles, each containing a minute amount of liquid. "They're collecting DNA," she said after running tests. "Not just from humans, but from everything. Plants, animals, insects. They're creating a biological map of our planet." Meanwhile, governments around the world attempted to establish contact with the visitors. Every known method of communication was tried. Radio signals, light patterns, mathematical sequences, all met with silence. 3 days after the ships appeared, they finally responded. The message came simultaneously to every screen, speaker, and digital device on the planet. The words appeared in each region's dominant language. "Your species has been selected for processing. Resistance is unnecessary and inadvisable. No explanation," followed. No demands or conditions, just that single, chilling statement. Hours later, the first extraction centers appeared. 3 enormous structures materialized in Beijing, Cairo, and Mexico City. They rose from the ground like giant metal flowers, unfolding and expanding until they covered several city blocks. People living near these structures reported a strange compulsion to walk toward them. Those who entered did not come out. When military forces attempted to approach the extraction centers, they found themselves stopped by invisible barriers. Missiles fired at the structures detonated harmlessly against shields no one could see. Bullets, tanks, even experimental energy weapons, nothing made an impact. Frank was part of a team analyzing footage from Mexico City when he noticed something strange. "Look at their eyes," he said, pointing to people walking toward the structure. "They're all looking at their phones or watches." That's when he realized the connection. The aliens hadn't just been mapping their networks. They had infiltrated them completely. They were using humanity's own technology to control them. "We need to shut everything down," Frank urged his superiors. "All networks, all connected devices. It's how they're getting to us." But it was too late for a global shutdown. The invasion had moved to its next phase. In the White House Situation Room, the president and his advisors watched helplessly as reports came in from around the world. The aliens, now identified in military communications as Valkyrie based on symbols found on their ships, had begun more direct collection methods. Smaller craft swept through cities, capturing humans with beams of pale blue light. Those taken simply vanished into the ships. No blood, no struggle, just empty spaces where people had been standing moments before. Lisa Wright, now working with a multi-agency task force, managed to intercept data from one of the collection ships. What she found horrified her. "They're categorizing us," she explained to the Emergency Scientific Council, "not as individuals, but by genetic markers. They're looking for specific traits in our DNA." 1 month after their arrival, the Valkyrie controlled most major cities. Human military forces had retreated to rural areas, forming resistance groups and trying to establish safe zones away from digital networks. Frank Miller, now part of a special operations team, helped establish new communication methods using old technology, radio equipment too basic for the Valkyrie to bother controlling. It wasn't much, but it allowed scattered human forces to begin sharing information. What they learned was grim. The people taken to extraction centers were being studied, their genetic material harvested. Some were returned, seemingly unharmed but changed in subtle ways. They spoke of the Valkyrie not as invaders, but as elevators who had come to help humanity reach its next stage. As the sun set on the first month of occupation, humanity faced a terrible truth. Earth had been an easy target. Their technology, which they had been so proud of, had been turned against them. Their weapons were useless. Their governments were in chaos. But in hidden places, people like Frank and Lisa began to ask the right questions. Why did the Valkyrie want human DNA? Why did they need living subjects? What were they looking for? The answers would lead to humanity's greatest challenge, and eventually, to a resistance that would shake the stars. 3 months had passed since the Valkyrie arrived. Winter settled over the northern parts of Earth, but the cold brought no relief from the alien presence. Their ships continued to hover in the skies, dark and threatening. The extraction centers, in Beijing, Cairo, and Mexico City, had been joined by dozens more across every continent. Deep beneath the ruins of Chicago, in what had once been a government bunker, Dr. Alan Black wiped sweat from his forehead. The room was hot from the computers and equipment that surrounded him. On the table in front of him lay what appeared to be a piece of the Valkyrie technology, a small triangular device recovered from a damaged collection ship. "Anything new?" asked General Susan Carter as she entered the room. Her uniform was worn and dirty, but she still carried herself with authority. Before the invasion, she had commanded an Air Force cyber warfare division. Now she led one of the largest resistance groups in North America. Alan shook his head. "It's frustrating. Their technology doesn't follow our rules. It's like trying to understand a language where the words change meaning depending on who's listening." He pointed to the screen beside him, which showed the internal structure of the device. "But I've noticed something. When we run electricity through it, it responds. Not just by activating, but by adapting. It learns." Susan frowned. "You mean it's alive?" "Not exactly, but not exactly mechanical either. It's something in between." Alan ran a hand through his messy hair. "The breakthrough came yesterday. We tried hitting it with computer viruses, old ones, new ones, anything we could think of. Most did nothing, but a few caused reactions." He pressed a button, and the triangular device glowed faintly. "They're vulnerable to certain types of digital attacks, just not the ones we've been trying. They think digitally, but not like us. Their entire technology seems to be based on quantum information states that exist in superposition. In English, please, Susan said. Alan smiled slightly. They don't just use computers, they are partly digital themselves, and that might be a weakness we can exploit. 500 miles away, in a network of caves in the Appalachian Mountains, another group of survivors had made a different kind of discovery. Kate Bailey had been a college professor before the invasion. Now she spent her days observing Valkyrie behavior patterns through binoculars and recording her findings in a worn notebook. They never act alone, she explained to Jack Martinez, the former park ranger who led their group. They sat around a small fire, keeping their voices low even though they were far from any Valkyrie patrols. When a single Valkyrie gets separated from others, it freezes, like it doesn't know what to do without orders. Jack nodded slowly. I've seen that too. Took out one of their scouts last week. The other one just stood there until our guys got close enough to take it down too. Kate flipped through her notebook. They're a hive mind, but not completely. There's a dependency structure. Each one needs constant input from higher-ranking members. If we can disrupt their command channels, we might be able to isolate units from the collective. This information traveled along the Resistance's makeshift communication network, eventually reaching Frank Miller and Lisa Wright, who now worked together at a hidden base in the Nevada desert. They had been studying a captured Valkyrie data core, a sphere about the size of a baseball that seemed to contain information storage technology far beyond human understanding. If Kate is right about their command structure, this becomes even more important, Frank said, pointing to the data core. They had managed to extract some information from it, though much remained unreadable. We've translated enough to understand their basic mission, Lisa replied. She pulled up a series of images on her screen. They aren't colonizers or conquerors in the way we thought. They're harvesters. The screen showed genetic sequences, hundreds of them from various species on Earth, but the human sequences were highlighted. Earth is valuable to them because of us. Not our resources or strategic position, but human genetic material specifically. Lisa pointed to certain highlighted sections of DNA. They're after what they call adaptation sequences, genetic code that allows for rapid evolutionary response. Frank frowned. But why? What do they want it for? I think they want to incorporate it into themselves. Lisa brought up another image, this one showing what appeared to be a Valkyrie genetic structure. Their own genetic code is remarkably stable. Too stable. They barely evolve at all. It makes them strong but inflexible. The information from these separate resistance groups began to form a clearer picture of their enemy. The Valkyrie weren't invincible. They had weaknesses, their dependency on a command structure, their vulnerability to certain types of digital attacks, and their apparent need for human genetic material. At a secure meeting of resistance leaders, held in an old missile silo in Montana, plans began to take shape. Representatives from groups across the globe shared what they had learned. We can't beat them with bullets, Samantha Rogers said. She had been a programmer for a major tech company before the invasion. She had lost her husband during the first days when the Valkyrie took Seattle. But we can beat them with bits. Using the knowledge gained from Alan Black's research, Sam had identified a critical vulnerability in the Valkyrie systems. They relied on quantum entanglement for instantaneous communication across vast distances. This same technology connected their ships, weapons, and even the biological components of their soldiers. If we can create a virus that targets their quantum network, we could disrupt everything they do, she explained. Not just their machines, but the Valkyrie themselves. The plan was dangerous and uncertain. Creating such a virus would require a deep understanding of technology that humans had barely begun to grasp, and deploying it would mean infiltrating one of the Valkyrie command ships, a task that seemed nearly impossible. We'll need volunteers, General Carter said, looking around the room. People willing to go into those ships knowing they might not come back. A man stood up from the back of the room. Captain Daniel Woods had served with Navy SEALs before the invasion. Since then, he had led guerrilla operations against Valkyrie ground forces, earning a reputation for impossible successes. My team will go, he said simply. As the meeting continued, Sam Rogers pulled Frank and Lisa aside. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Something I didn't want to mention to the whole group yet. Based on what we've learned about their quantum systems, this virus won't just shut them down. It will rewrite them. And because their biology is partly digital, it will rewrite the Valkyrie themselves," Lisa finished, understanding dawning on her face. Sam nodded gravely. "If this works, we won't just defeat them. We might erase them from existence." Outside the silo, snow fell gently on a world changed. 6 months had passed since the ships darkened Earth's skies. Humanity had been driven back, forced into hiding, hunted by creatures that saw them as little more than genetic material to be harvested. But in hidden places, the counterattack was taking shape. Humanity had been an easy target because they had been unprepared. Now they were ready to fight back with the greatest weapon they possessed: their ability to adapt, to understand their enemy, and to turn that understanding into a plan for survival. The hidden lab beneath the Rocky Mountains hummed with activity. 6 months after the invasion, Project Ghost had become humanity's best hope. Scientists and engineers worked day and night, developing the digital weapon that might save Earth from the Valkyrie. Samantha Rogers hadn't slept properly in days. Dark circles under her eyes showed her exhaustion, but her hands remained steady as she typed line after line of code. The quantum virus was unlike anything humans had created before. It used principles of physics that most people couldn't understand, targeting the unique way that Valkyrie technology processed information. "How's it coming?" Frank Miller asked, bringing her a cup of coffee. Sam took the cup gratefully. "Almost there. The virus can replicate itself through their quantum network. Now, once inside, it should spread to every connected system. The hard part was making sure it only targets Valkyrie technology and not our own." Lisa Wright joined them, carrying a tablet with the latest test results. "The simulation shows a 94% success rate. That's the best we can hope for without an actual Valkyrie system to test it on." The three of them looked at the main screen, which showed a 3D model of the virus's projected spread. Starting from a single point, a Valkyrie command ship, the virus would travel instantly through quantum connections to every Valkyrie system on Earth and in orbit. "If this works," Frank said quietly, "it won't just shut down their machines. It will affect the Valkyrie themselves, right?" Sam nodded. "Their biology and technology are connected in ways we're just beginning to understand. They exist partly in a quantum state. This virus won't just disrupt their communications, it will disrupt them." In another section of the base, Captain Daniel Woods prepared his team for the mission ahead. They had been training for weeks, using the limited knowledge they had about Valkyrie ship layouts. The plan was to infiltrate one of the smaller command vessels, plant the virus in its central processing unit, and escape before it spread. "We only get one shot at this," Daniel told the 12 men and women gathered around him. They wore black tactical gear, modified to shield them from Valkyrie detection systems. "The virus needs to be delivered directly to their main quantum processor. Once it's in, it will spread on its own." Paul Johnson, an electronics expert who had reverse-engineered Valkyrie communication devices, checked the special equipment they would carry. Each team member would have a small device containing the virus, in case anyone got separated. Only one needed to reach the target to succeed. Dr. Emma Davis, a physicist who had helped develop the virus's quantum properties, explained the final details. "The Valkyrie use quantum signatures as security. We've programmed the virus to mimic these signatures, but there's a risk they'll detect it. Speed is essential." Across the world, other resistance groups prepared similar missions. 12 teams, in total, would attempt infiltrations of Valkyrie vessels. The hope was that at least one would succeed. The night before the mission, General Carter called a final meeting. The mood was tense but determined. These men and women knew they might not return, but they also knew the stakes. "Tomorrow we take the fight to them," Carter said. "For 6 months we've been running and hiding. Tomorrow we hit back." After the meeting, Daniel found a quiet corner to sit alone. He took out a worn photo of his family. His wife and daughter had been in Boston when the Valkyrie hit the East Coast. He hadn't heard from them since. Like many others, he fought not just for humanity's future, but with the slim hope of finding lost loved ones. Sam approached him, carrying a small metal case. "This is the primary payload," she said, opening it to reveal a device no bigger than a credit card. "It needs to be connected directly to their central processor. The others are backups, but this one has the strongest version of the virus." Daniel tucked the device into a special pocket in his gear. "We'll get it there," he promised. Dawn broke over the mountains as the teams prepared to leave. They would travel separately, using different routes to reach their targets. Daniel's team was assigned to a command ship hovering over what remained of Denver. They moved through underground tunnels, avoiding Valkyrie patrols. Years of working in covert operations had prepared Daniel for missions like this, but nothing could fully prepare anyone for infiltrating an alien vessel. When they reached the outskirts of Denver, they got their first close look at their target. The Valkyrie command ship floated about 1,000 feet above the city center, smaller craft coming and going from its underside. "There's our ride," Daniel said, pointing to a cargo transport approaching a landing zone. These transports collected materials from the surface, mostly metals and rare elements the Valkyrie used to build their extraction centers. Using the chaos of the landing zone as cover, Daniel's team moved swiftly. They attached themselves to the underside of the transport using magnetic clamps. When the ship lifted off, they went with it. The journey into the command ship was terrifying. They clung to the outside of the transport as it entered a massive bay. Valkyrie moved about below them, tall figures in dark armor. Their movements were precise and coordinated, like parts of a single organism. When the transport docked, Daniel gave the signal. They dropped silently to the floor behind stacks of cargo containers. Using hand signals, he directed the team to split into 3 groups. Each would try a different route to the central processor. Emma led the first group, Paul the second, and Daniel the third. They moved cautiously through the ship's corridors using devices that disrupted the Valkyrie's sensing equipment. The ship's interior was unlike anything human architects would design. Spaces flowed into one another without clear boundaries, and surfaces glowed with strange energy. Daniel's group made it furthest. Using Emma's maps based on scans of the ship, they navigated toward the center. Twice they had to hide as Valkyrie patrols passed. Once they nearly walked into a room full of the aliens, only Paul's quick warning stopping them. Finally, they reached a circular chamber pulsing with blue-green light. In the center floated what looked like a sphere of liquid metal, constantly shifting and changing shape. "That's it," Emma whispered. "The quantum processor. It's not just a computer. It's a physical manifestation of their network." Daniel took out the device Sam had given him. "How do I connect it?" "Just place it against the surface. The virus will do the rest." Just as Daniel stepped forward, alarms began to sound throughout the ship. The other teams had been discovered. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before Valkyrie soldiers reached them. "Cover me," Daniel ordered. He ran toward the processor while the others took defensive positions by the doors. The sound of Valkyrie weapons, a high-pitched whine followed by crackling energy, filled the corridor outside. Paul was hit first, the blast throwing him against a wall. Emma returned fire with a modified human weapon that seemed to affect the Valkyrie, but there were too many. Daniel reached the processor. The surface felt strange against his hands, neither solid nor liquid. He pressed the device against it and watched as the small rectangle seemed to melt into the shifting sphere. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the blue-green light flickered. The sphere's surface began to ripple more violently. The device had disappeared completely, absorbed into the processor. "It's done," Daniel shouted. "Fall back." They fought their way out, carrying their wounded. Of the 5 who had entered the processor room, only 3 made it back to the cargo bay. They found a small Valkyrie craft, and Paul, despite his injuries, managed to activate it. As they flew away from the command ship, Daniel looked back. From the outside, nothing seemed different, but inside, the virus had begun its work. Across the world, the other infiltration teams met varying fates. Of the 12 attempts, only 2 others succeeded in delivering their payloads. But 3 was enough. The virus had entered the Valkyrie network, and now it would spread. For 3 days after the infiltration missions, nothing seemed to change. The Valkyrie ship still hung in the skies. The extraction centers continued to operate. Resistance leaders began to fear the virus had failed. In the underground command center, Samantha Rogers stared at screens showing satellite images of Valkyrie positions worldwide. No unusual activity, no signs of disruption. Had all their work, all those sacrifices been for nothing? Maybe we were wrong about their systems, she said to Lisa Wright, who sat beside her. Maybe the virus couldn't spread through their network. Lisa shook her head. We weren't wrong. The virus got in. We confirmed that from Daniel's team. It just needs time to work. On the morning of the 4th day, the first reports came in. A Valkyrie patrol near Austin, Texas suddenly stopped moving. The soldiers stood frozen for several minutes, then began walking in random directions, bumping into objects as if they couldn't see them. Similar incidents appeared across the globe. Valkyrie ships drifted slightly from their positions. Some weapon systems fired without targets. Extraction centers temporarily shut their doors, trapping Valkyrie workers inside. Frank Miller burst into the command center, his face flushed with excitement. It's working! The virus is affecting their systems. More reports flooded in throughout the day. A Valkyrie command ship over Moscow descended to 500 feet, hovered there for hours, then rose again. In Sydney, extraction center doors opened and closed repeatedly, allowing dozens of human captives to escape. Admiral Zeth Kor, leader of the Valkyrie invasion, recognized the attack for what it was. From his flagship above former Washington, D.C., he sent emergency orders to all Valkyrie forces. Disconnect from the central network immediately. But this order, sent through the very network that was infected, only accelerated the virus's spread. Each communication carried the virus to new systems, new ships, new Valkyrie soldiers. By the 6th day, the effects became more dramatic. A carrier ship in orbit lost power completely and began to break apart as its structural integrity fields failed. Pieces of it burned through the atmosphere, visible from the ground like a meteor shower. Daniel Woods and his surviving team members watched from their hideout in the mountains. Is that what I think it is? Asked Emma, pointing to the fiery streaks across the night sky. Daniel nodded. That's a Valkyrie ship coming apart. The virus is working. On the ground, the changes in Valkyrie soldiers were even more striking. Some became disoriented as their neural links to the collective were severed. They wandered aimlessly, unable to receive orders or coordinate with each other. Others became violent, attacking anything that moved, including other Valkyrie. General, Carter saw an opportunity. They're vulnerable now, she told resistance leaders in an emergency broadcast. It's time to strike back. Across the world, resistance forces launched synchronized attacks against Valkyrie positions. They targeted extraction centers first, freeing thousands of captured humans. Then they moved on to landing zones and supply depots. The Valkyrie, once so coordinated and effective, could not mount a coherent defense. Individual soldiers fought fiercely, but without central coordination they were overwhelmed by human forces fighting for their world. In the Nevada base, Dr. Alan Black made a crucial discovery about the virus's effects. It's not just shutting down their systems, he explained to Sam and the others. It's rewriting them, and because their biology is partly digital, it's affecting the Valkyrie themselves. He showed them microscope images of Valkyrie tissue samples they had collected earlier. The cellular structure was changing, breaking down in some areas, reorganizing in others. They're not simply dying, Alan said. Their consciousness is fragmenting as the virus corrupts the quantum states of their neural networks. They're being erased from existence. The implications were both horrifying and hopeful. The virus was more effective than they had dared to hope, but the nature of its effects raised uncomfortable questions about what they had unleashed. Not all of the Valkyrie fleet succumbed to the virus. Some ships, recognizing the threat early enough, had isolated themselves by severing all communication links. These silent ships, as humans began to call them, remained operational but cut off from the Valkyrie collective. Led by Subcommander Vex Thal, These remaining vessels gathered above key human cities. Unable to coordinate a complex invasion any longer, they turned to simple destruction. Their weapons began to fire on population centers, infrastructure, and resistance positions. "They're going to destroy what they can't have," Frank said, as they watched footage of silent ships attacking cities. "They know they've lost, so they're trying to make sure we lose too." In what remained of London, a silent ship hovered above the city, its weapons turning the ancient streets to rubble. Resistance fighters could do little against the massive vessel. Their weapons barely scratched its hull. Similar scenes played out in Tokyo, Rio de Janeiro, and Cairo. The silent ships, though few in number, carried enough firepower to level cities. And without the virus affecting them, they remained as deadly as ever. Hope came from an unexpected source. As the virus spread through the Valkyrie network, some of their technology began to malfunction in ways that humans could exploit. Resistance. Engineers discovered they could repurpose Valkyrie weapons that had been affected by the virus. In Cairo, resistance fighters used a captured Valkyrie energy cannon to damage a silent ship enough to force it to retreat. In Rio, they managed to activate a Valkyrie shield generator to protect part of the city from orbital bombardment. The tide was turning, but the war wasn't over. The surviving Valkyrie grew more desperate, more willing to destroy rather than retreat. Sub-Commander Vexthal gathered the remaining silent ships above Washington, D.C., forming the largest concentration of Valkyrie forces since the initial invasion. From her flagship, Vexthal broadcast a message on all frequencies. "Your weapon cannot touch us. We have cut ourselves off from the infected network. We will burn your world to ash rather than let you keep it." Samantha Rogers saw an opportunity in this threat. "They're all gathered in one place now," she told General Carter. "If we could find a way to amplify the virus, to transmit it directly to those ships." "How would we do that?" Carter asked. "They've isolated themselves from the network." Sam looked thoughtful. "They've isolated themselves from their network, but they're still receiving and sending signals. They're still communicating with each other, just in a more limited way." A plan began to form. If they could modify the virus to transmit through different channels, perhaps using Earth's own communication systems as a carrier, they might be able to infect even the silent ships. As resistance forces worldwide fought to contain the destruction from the silent ships, the team in Nevada worked frantically on a new version of the virus. Time was running out. With each passing hour, more of Earth's cities burned under Valkyrie weapons fire. The final battle for humanity's future was about to begin. The Valkyrie had thought Earth an easy target. Now they faced extinction at the hands of the very species they had come to harvest. The sky above Washington, D.C. darkened as the Valkyrie silent ships gathered. 12 massive vessels hovered in formation, their weapons pointed downward. Sub-Commander Vexithal stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching holographic displays of the ruined city below. The humans had fought back harder than any species the Valkyrie had ever encountered. Now they would pay the price. "Begin final bombardment sequence," Vexthal ordered. "Once this continent is cleansed, we move to the next." In the resistance base in Nevada, Samantha Rogers worked frantically to modify the virus. The original version had spread through the Valkyrie's quantum network. This new version would need to transmit through conventional signals, radio waves, microwaves, any electromagnetic frequency the silent ships might be monitoring. "We need to use Earth's own communication networks," she explained to General Carter. "The silent ships are still receiving data to track our movements. If we can send the virus through those channels, we might reach them." Carter nodded. "What do you need?" "Access to every broadcasting station still under our control. Satellite uplinks, radio towers, anything that can send a signal, and we need to boost the power, make it impossible for them to ignore." Across the country, resistance teams moved to secure broadcasting facilities. Some were already under human control. Others required fighting through Valkyrie forces. In each location, they installed special transmitters designed by Sam's team. Daniel Woods led one such team to the remains of a military communications facility in Virginia, just outside the range of the silent ship's sensors. The building was partially collapsed, but the main transmission equipment remained intact. "How long will this take?" he asked the technicians as they installed the equipment. 20 minutes to connect everything," one replied. "Then we wait for the signal from Nevada." Similar scenes played out at dozens of locations across the globe. In places where the Valkyrie presence was too strong for direct action, resistance fighters used stealth to place smaller transmitters on existing towers. Back in Nevada, Dr. Alan Black had made another discovery about the virus. "It's evolving," he told Sam as they prepared the master transmission. "The more Valkyrie systems it infects, the more it adapts. It's learning from their technology." Sam looked up from her computer. "Is that bad?" "No, it's actually helpful. It means the virus can overcome any countermeasures the silent ships might have developed. But it also means we don't know exactly what will happen when it reaches them." As they prepared the final version of the virus, Lisa Wright monitored Valkyrie communications. Though most of their network was corrupted, enough remained to track their plans. "They're positioning for a full attack," she reported. "All silent ships are targeting major population centers. They plan to render Earth uninhabitable." Time was running out. Sam finished her work and sent the virus package to all the transmission sites. "Everyone ready?" she asked over the secure channel. Confirmations came in from around the world. 28 sites were prepared to broadcast simultaneously, creating a signal the silent ships couldn't possibly ignore or block. "On my mark," Sam said, her finger hovering over the activation key. 3, 2, 1, transmit." Across the globe, the modified transmitters powered up. They sent the virus not as data, but embedded in the very frequencies the Valkyrie used to communicate between ships. Every scan they made of Earth, every signal they sent to their weapons would now carry the virus. In Washington, D.C., Vexthal noticed something strange on the flagship's instruments. The sensors were picking up unusual patterns in Earth's electromagnetic field. Before he could order countermeasures, the ship's systems began to flicker. "Shut down all receivers," he commanded. "Cut all external connections." But it was too late. The virus had entered their systems through the very sensors they used to target their weapons. And unlike the first version, this one didn't need the Valkyrie network to spread. It jumped from system to system inside each ship, corrupting everything it touched. From his observation post on the outskirts of D.C., Daniel watched through binoculars as the flagship began to behave strangely. Its lights flickered. Its position shifted slightly. Then something unprecedented happened. The massive ship seemed to shimmer, its outline becoming briefly transparent before solidifying again. The same effect spread to the other silent ships, a wave of distortion passing through their hulls. "What's happening to them?" Emma asked, watching through her own binoculars. "I don't know," Daniel replied. "But whatever it is, it's not just affecting their ships." Inside the flagship, Vexthal watched in horror as members of his crew began to fade. Not die. Fade. Their forms became translucent, then disappeared entirely, leaving their armor and equipment behind. He felt a strange sensation in his own limbs, looking down to see his hands beginning to shimmer. The effect spread quickly. Within hours, all the silent ships hung motionless above the city. When resistance forces cautiously approached, they found the vessels empty, not destroyed, but abandoned. The Valkyrie were gone. Similar reports came from around the world. Every Valkyrie ship, every extraction center, every piece of their technology remained, but the aliens themselves had vanished. The virus hadn't just shut down their systems, it had erased the Valkyrie themselves, just as Sam had predicted. 1 month after the final battle, humanity began to rebuild. The alien technology, now harmless, was studied and adapted for human use. The ships provided advanced transportation. The extraction centers were repurposed as manufacturing facilities. Even the weapons were modified to help clear rubble and construct new buildings. In a research facility built from a former Valkyrie laboratory, Lisa Wright made one final discovery. Analyzing the data from the aliens' original probes, she found what they had been searching for all along. It wasn't just any genetic trait, she explained to a council of world leaders. It was something unique to humans among all species they had encountered. Imagination, the ability to conceive of things that don't exist and then make them real. Frank Miller, who had been invited to represent the cybersecurity division, nodded thoughtfully. That's why our virus works so well. We imagined a way to beat an enemy far more advanced than ourselves, and then we made it real. The Valkyrie had come to Earth seeking to harvest this human trait, to incorporate it into their own rigid, structured existence. Instead, it had been their undoing. 1 year after the invasion began, humanity held a global day of remembrance for those lost in the conflict, but it was also a celebration of survival. In cities around the world, people gathered beneath skies now clear of alien ships. Daniel Woods stood on a hill overlooking the rebuilt Washington, D.C., watching the sunset. The world had changed forever. Humanity now possessed technology beyond anything they had before, opening possibilities for exploration beyond their own planet. They thought we were an easy target, he said to Emma, who stood beside him. They were wrong. In orbit above Earth, the repurposed Valkyrie ships prepared for their first mission to Mars. Humans had taken what their invaders left behind and made it their own. The stars, once a source of terror, now represented possibility. Earth had not just survived the invasion. It had erased it and emerged stronger than before.